I just had a little idea come to me. So I've noticed that you're your state of consciousness. You are your consciousness, right? You are that which is conscious of being. You're not that which you are conscious of being, although you've identified with that, but you are that consciousness of being. And whatever you identify with is sort of a distorted version of yourself. It is a version of yourself, but it's distorted. Like, for instance, the body, my body, is a distorted version of my infinite consciousness, right? Because I know that I'm conscious, but I just assume that my body is what's conscious. But really, you're behind that, right? So, if you are this consciousness, you are consciousness, right? And if you rest as consciousness, just being conscious, then there's not much going on. Which sounds, there's levels to it, and it sounds boring, I guess. But if you rest as consciousness without labeling, without thoughts, without things just popping in, you just rest as consciousness. Take a second just to be conscious and rest as that. Then you I sort of realize that there's you're channeling, right? You're channeling everything that you're doing, right? Based on what you're conscious of being, sort of. Because all that there is consciousness. Everything is made up of consciousness. And everything is distortion of consciousness. Even consciousness is sort of the first distortion, right? And so you have the Big Bang. What's the Big Bang? Distortions of consciousness, right? Consciousness distorting, and it distorts infinitely, outwards in infinite directions. It's sort of right? So if you rest as consciousness and you clear yourself of all these ideas, right? You are at the source of all information. You are the source of the Big Bang. You are that which exploded. And if you rest as consciousness, you can go back to that time. That was billions of years ago, right? But what was it like before anything existed, before consciousness exploded? And you can rest and, find out what you are. But anyway, since you're before everything, and you're eternally resting simultaneously before everything existed, that's where you're coming from. And then when you're viewing the world and you're in the world, that's billions of our years, even though it doesn't exist, that's billions of years later. Or you're channeling a certain reality, right? So you're channeling a reality. Somebody in the medieval days, that wasn't 10,000 years ago, or however, I don't know specific dates, but if you were in the medieval times, it's not like that was the past from now. That is a different vibrational reality. And so, right, it's just as different as us in America, or I'm in America, right? Versus somebody, you say, children dying in Africa. That's something that people bring up a lot. How can you just be consciousness? How can you be choosing reality if children are dying in Africa? Well, that doesn't exist in our time. That's not somewhere else. That's consciousness vibrating, specifically choosing to vibrate at that level. And so, if you exist in medieval times, like someone who existed, and you think, wow, how unfair they had to go through all this bullshit, and like, look at us now, we're so privileged. That wasn't a past time. That wasn't a moment in evolution. That was consciousness vibrating, specifically choosing to vibrate at that reality. And there's no difference between consciousness vibrating here and consciousness vibrating there. You know what I mean? There's no time difference. Like, they got us tricked with these, like, let's say you watch a black and white movie and it's like, oh, look at the world when it was old, and you think it's different, but it's just consciousness vibrating. You know, it's just consciousness. It was just conscious. It was just as conscious as it is now. There is no difference. And back in medieval times, it was just consciousness being consciousness, and it was just as, you know, in a lot of ways it was probably better because they weren't so conditioned as we are. But we're, you know. But anyway, you're channeling. You're a channeler. That's what we all are. We're channeling things. When I talk, I'm not talking from a thinking mind. I'm not thinking about talking. I'm channeling talking, right? Like, you don't think about talking, and the more you pay attention and are conscious of yourself talking, you can sort of communicate ideas, and you're conscious of the ideas. You're not conscious of the workings of the talking. Like, you're channeling that, and yes, you learned it, but you're channeling that, right? You're channeling everything that you do is a channel, a movement of realities, moving through realities. Man, and I forgot what I was going to say at the end here. Channeling, mirror. Oh, yes, personality, right? So if you're channeling everything, personality, right, like individuation, which is beautiful. Everyone is individuated already, but you add on top of your own already individuated self this idea of individuation, this idea that I need to be an individual. I need to prove that I'm an individual. I need to prove that I'm a personality, even though you already are those things, right? So it's like you're doubling down, and it's just unnecessary. You're doing it twice. That stuff's already being done, and you're trying to do it again, and it's just counterproductive. So that's an idea that we all have, and it's sort of this ego, right? It's the ego. And the ego is an effect. It's not an actual thing. So you never try to like figure the ego out. It's an effect because you're not doing what you want. So my whole point is, you're channeling, and a personality, right? That's all. That's a natural channel. Just like I don't try to talk, I just talk. The more I try to talk, it gets harder to talk. So when you try to have a personality or try to be an individual, right, which is what we're doing, you are already those things. So what that does is block the channeling, because now you're no longer channeling. You're like, channeling is just the natural state of things, is my point. And now you're trying to channel this thing. You're trying to be a personality. You're trying to be an individual. And that you're trying, you know, that it ends up blocking the flow. And how many things do we have in our own mind? How many ideas that are unconscious and, you know, you picked up from other people? And it's not your fault. That's what I love. It's not your fault. It's unconscious. You picked it up from somebody else. But how many ideas like that are we perpetuating because we're not doing what we want to do? And You know, I'm guilty of it too. Like, I'm guilty of it, as if it's bad. I do it just like everyone else does it. But it only becomes because we've been conditioned, and it's like not our original state at all. And when we die, we'll go back to our original state, and it won't have an effect on us. You know, it might have an effect, but it's not going to have the amount of an effect that it has here. Obviously. But, you know, like, you kind of get what I'm saying. You have this natural consciousness, and that's already a distortion of what is, like, slightly. The first, you know, being conscious. Right? That's sort of the first distorting factor. So you're conscious, you're being conscious, which is slightly distorted. But then on top of that, you have an infinite number of distortions to get you to this point, right? Where you're channeling within a seeming environment when it's all just consciousness. So it's all you. On the absolute level, it's all you. But then on the relative level, that's where we have these ideas of separation, and you know that's technically true. From your perspective, you are separated. You are an individual, right? Because that's what you're channeling as consciousness. You're channeling that experience, which is awesome. So, like with the spiritual teachings, I feel like there's this. You have to be, you know, there's this idea, okay, so you learn about the absolute, you learn about resting as consciousness, and then there's this idea that, like, I have to be resting as consciousness, I have to always be this absolute. You know what I mean? I gotta try and be the absolute constantly. Which is a trap, because simultaneously, the absolute and the relative exist simultaneously. So you're channeling the relative from the absolute, always. And you're always the absolute. There's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter if you're thinking about killing people. You know what I mean? There's no moral compass. It just is. And it expresses itself as all. Distortions. But they're just distortions. But then, you know, so you're so already just being on this planet and thinking you're a human and existing and doing things is such a distortion already. But it's one that you're choosing. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like, oh, you're distorted, like in a negative way. But distortion simply as it is not absolute truth. The ideas that you have. But in order to operate on this planet, you need to have those distortions, or else you wouldn't be on the planet, you know what I mean? So you need to be able to at least switch, you know, and you will always be able to switch between the absolute and the relative. But what happens is you either start trying to be the absolute, and you're like, why the fuck is the world still here? Or you start trying to be the relative. When in fact it's both, you know? But what I'm trying to say is everything within the relative doesn't need further distortion. It's already distorted for you, right? Like, just like the talking, like, I can talk, I don't know how I can talk, really. I'm conscious that I'm talking, and the more I pay attention to it with my conscious mind, I can tell that I'm talking, but I can also see that I'm not thinking about it, and I'm not really doing it. Like, just try talking for a while, and be conscious that you are talking, but you're not having any thoughts, because you're flowing. You know, it's strange. It's strange. You don't have to think about talking. Like, how do I talk? How do I talk? You know? So why do you do that with a personality, an individuation? Like, the only time you would think about talking is if you weren't talking, right? If you aren't talking, you could be thinking about talking. But while you're doing it, you can't be thinking about it, right? You can't be, I mean, you probably could be, but it's not, you don't think about talking while you're talking. That's my point. And that's sort of an example of the individuation of someone or a personality. Is like, you are the personality. When you are being your personality or your individual self, which you already are, when you're being that true individuation, that true version of yourself, the true personality, you don't have to prove that you're being an individual. You know what I mean? It's only when you're not being that you would have to prove that you are that. You know, and that's what you see in the world. Oh, I want to be an individual. I want to be a personality. I want everyone to say, yeah, you are a personality. You are an individual. You want gratification from everyone. You want everyone to tell you that. When that's already the case. All of existence is showing you that you are already the personality. You are already the individual. The only reason that you would need, you know, someone who's trying to prove that to themselves doesn't believe that they are that. It's like a little unnecessary paradox, a little bit of a loop, right? Like, you're never gonna fulfill the true personality, the true individual nature of yourself, unless you stop trying to like chase that, because it already exists. There's nothing you need to do. I don't need to get a tattoo on my face and a piercing, although nothing wrong with that. Those are awesome. But you get my point. Like, to be who I need to be, I don't need anything else. You're born as an individual. And you are completely individual, and you're completely separated from everything. You know, you can't actually interact with anything or any people. And at the same time, you are everything, and you are consciousness, and you just are everything. So it's a paradox, right? On the absolute, you are everything. On the relative, you are completely separated. You know? But you're never actually completely separated, because you're always the absolute. But if you're viewing it from a relative perspective, like, oh, I am this body, I am in this world, which is accurate because it's a distortion, and it's a true distortion that you've chosen. Like, you wanted to be this distorted. And it is a distortion, but there always is going to be a distortion. You can rest as the absolute, but for the absolute to exist, you must also be within creation. You must also be distorted slightly, until, you know, or else you're not really part of an infinite absolute if you're not distorted. You know? And you can't become less distorted, really, in your expression, right? Because here I am on the planet, and if I become so absolute, I might just float off the planet, you know, or cease to exist, which is fine, but then I'm not on this planet. I can't play this game anymore, and I chose to play this game. I want to be playing this game, obviously, or else I wouldn't be here. So, what's really the problem isn't the fact that we're here on the planet. It's the fact that or the distortions. It's the fact that we are double distorting. Like for instance, here's an example with like maybe something that happened to you as a kid is very traumatic and you just can't accept it that it happened. You want to be told it's okay, that it's accepted, right? You need somebody to tell you, oh no, it's okay, you're still accepted. That, you're trying to prove how to work around this trauma. When in reality, it's already accepted. It already happened. It is. There's nothing to prove, disprove, to work through. It already happened. It is accepted. You are accepted as you are, And so, like, trying to accept what already is accepted is it's an impossibility, double paradox. There's like these double infinite complexity to that because you're delving into something that already exists, It's like trying to prove that you are eating an apple while you're eating an apple. And then trying to prove to yourself that you're actually eating it. Like, you're never going to be able to prove that you're eating the apple because everything's based off correlation, not causation. So you're never actually going to be able to prove you're eating the apple. You know what I mean? But you are eating the apple. Makes sense. It's a little circle. I like that. Thanks for watching.